Let's go ahead and take a look at the determinants of aggregate demand. So these are things that are going to shift our entire aggregate demand curve either to the right or over to the left. So there's an easy way and a very difficult way to sort of approach this, and we need to take a look at both of them. The easy way is to go ahead and take a look at these components of aggregate demand. So consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. If any of these components change, that means that, hey, our aggregate demand curve has to shift as well. So if consumption increases, investment increases, government spending increases, net exports increase, then the entire aggregate demand curve is going to shift over to the right away from the origin. And if they all decrease, it's going to shift it over to the left. So that's something that's very easy for us to take a look at. So the things that are going to affect aggregate demand are essentially the components of GDP. The difficult thing that we need to go ahead and take a look at is that under each one of these categories of GDP are smaller subcategories or subcomponents. So under consumption, there's maybe 3 or 4 things that will affect consumption, and then because consumption changes, that's going to affect aggregate demand. Under investment, once again, there's maybe 3 or 4 smaller subcomponents that affect investment, and because investment changes, that affects aggregate demand, and then so on down the line. So with all of this, we need to go ahead and take a look at these smaller subcomponents and see how that is all going to affect the bigger components right here in order to influence where the aggregate demand curve is going to be heading. So once again, keep the analysis as simple as we can. The only things that we talk about here are only going to be affecting aggregate demand, and we will be making a few notations as well. Remember, if we have a shift of aggregate demand over to the right, we increase aggregate demand, so away from the origin. A factor that shifts aggregate demand to the right will increase output at every price level. So we'll only be doing this for this particular shift right here. If you want to go ahead and see what happens to the opposite side, just change everything to the opposite sign, as usual. So here, we need to go ahead and delve a little bit deeper into these determinants of aggregate demand. Determinants of aggregate demand. So here, once again, our good friend, these determinants. First, we take a look at consumption. And under consumption, there's going to be 4 different categories. We take a look at wealth. We take a look at consumer expectations. We take a look at household debt. And we finally take a look at taxes. So here, wealth, consumer expectations, debt, and taxes, these are all going to affect consumption. And once again, draw out your graphs to see exactly what's happening. We start off with our initial aggregate demand curve, AD0. We take a look at the price level on the vertical axis, and then aggregate output, or you can just put quantity, GDP, on the horizontal axis. And once again, we want to focus in on consumption increases, so C increases. We're going to be focusing in on the only increases in this particular section. If you want to see what happens with decreases, just change everything that we do here to the opposite side. So here, if we have increases in consumption, that's going to be affecting aggregate demand. So our aggregate demand curve shifts over to the right. So how do all these smaller subcomponents affect consumption? How are they going to increase consumption? Well, we'll tackle them one by one. So what has to happen with wealth in order for you to want to consume more? Obviously, you need to go ahead and have a wealth increase. So increases in wealth are going to cause consumption to go up. You have a lot more money. You feel a lot more wealthier. So you're going to make it rain. You're going to have a lot more spending. So therefore, as consumption goes up, aggregate demand goes up as well. Next, consumer confidence. Consumer confidence. So what has to happen to consumer confidence in order for consumption to go up? Consumer confidence has to increase as well. So here, just telling us exactly what you feel as a consumer about the economy. If you feel more confident about where the economy is heading, you feel more comfortable with spending your money, having higher consumption. With debt, you need to have less debt in order for you to want to go ahead and consume more. So there are going to be fewer restrictions on your borrowing and exactly how much you can spend if you have less debt. So the less debt, more consumption. And then, of course, with taxes, nobody likes taxes. So taxes have to decrease in this instance. So as taxes decrease, that's going to increase your disposable income. And as your disposable income increases, you have more consumption. So here, these are the 4 subcomponents under consumption. And this is all going to affect aggregate demand in this particular direction. If you want to see what happens when consumption goes down, just change everything that you see underlined right here to the opposite case and then shift your aggregate demand curve towards the origin instead. So far, so good. So brings back memories, right? So doing all these shifts. So once again, our second component is going to be investment. So here, investment. And remember that this is business investment, not necessarily financial investment. Investment, we take a look at three particular subcategories. We take a look at the interest rate. We take a look at the rate of return. And then finally here, we take a look at business expectations. So three smaller subcategories in terms of investment. And once again, we want to see exactly what happens, how all of these have to shift in order to have an increase in investment. So once again, something that we're taking a look at, we have the price level, we have aggregate output GDP, AD0, and we want to see what happens, how we shift it to AD1. So here, first of all, we take a look at interest rates. So what has to happen to interest rates in order for businesses and firms to have more investment? Remember, businesses and firms, they like very low interest rates. So here, interest rates have to decrease. As interest rates decreases, that just tells us that, hey, firms and businesses, they're more willing to undertake more investment because the cost of borrowing has declined. So therefore, they're going to go ahead and undertake more projects. They're going to go ahead and borrow more money to undertake their investments. Next, we take a look at the rate of return, something we've seen already, rate of return. With the rate of return, that just tells us exactly how much return can the firm expect from investing or making this particular investment project. Here, remember that firms and corporations, they'd like to see very high rates of return, so we can say that the rate of return becomes more positive in this instance. More positive. The more positive or the higher the rate of return becomes, the more likely the firm is willing to undertake this particular investment, so investment gets pushed up, as does aggregate demand. And then finally here, we take a look at expectations. And expectations fall along the same line as consumer expectations. We need expectations to improve in this instance. So as business expectations improve, firms and businesses feel better about where the economy is heading. They're going to undertake more investment. Aggregate demand gets shifted to the right as well. So here, just to be perfectly clear, there are going to be a few sort of determinants that are going to pop up under each of these categories. It happens on the demand side, it happens on the supply side as well. So we will be explicitly clear about what determinant we are going to be affecting. So here with expectations, we have on the business side, we have on the consumer side. So typically we'll say consumer confidence or business expectations or business sort of confidence, just to be clear about what determinant, either consumption or investment, we're hitting. We also see the same in terms of taxes. We see taxes in consumption. We see taxes on the supply side. We will be explicitly clear about exactly where all these determinants are going to be hitting in order for you to make sure that you get the right determinant. Third component is going to be government spending. And this is the simplest one out of all of them. Next is government spending. And remember, with government spending, it's going to include all three levels of government spending. So here we take a look at the federal, we take a look at the state, and we take a look at local government spending. So here we need to include all three levels of the government. And here, of course, we want to see what happens when G increases. As usual, just get a lot of practice building up these curves. We have AD0. We want to see what happens to AD1. We want to see increases. If government spending increases, AD1 is going to shift over to the right as well. And we have output there. So here, why is this going to be the most trivial one? Because if we have increases in any of these, that's going to exactly cause an increase in government spending. It's as simple as that. So here, we simply say government spending increases. And it doesn't really matter what level it is, federal, state, or local. If any of these increase, government spending increases, we shift our aggregate demand curve over to the right. And then finally here, we take a look at the last component, most complex out of all of them is going to be the net exports, where we take a look at two smaller subcategories. So net exports. And with net exports, we take a look at foreign income, and we also take a look at exchange rate changes. So here, foreign income. And then we also take a look at exchange rate changes. Exchange rate changes. So once again, hitting on the international theme just a little bit more in this chapter. So here, we're going to have X minus M. It is increasing. So here, net exports, remember, it's the difference between X and M. It's X minus M. Building up our final graph right here. So we have AD0, 0, shifting to AD1. We have price level, you have quantity. So here, if you ever majored in economics, you're going to be literally drawing thousands of these graphs. It'll get really tedious, but you'll have a good idea of exactly how to interpret and see exactly what's going on. So easiest one out of these two in terms of net exports is going to be foreign income. So exactly the income of people abroad, so international income. So if we're taking a look at the United States for this aggregate demand curve, which we typically are, foreign income includes things like, hey, what happens if the citizens in China, their income increases or changes? Japanese income, Russian income, Mexican income, Canadian income. It just has to be someone else's income abroad. So here, what has to happen to foreign income intuitively in order for us to have an increase in our net exports, an increase in US net exports? So here, if foreign income is going to increase, that just tells us that, hey, foreigners have more income nowadays, so therefore they're going to be buying more goods and services, not only from their own country, but also abroad as well. So anytime foreign income increases, we here in the United States are happy about that because they're going to be able to be buying more of our goods. So here they will be able to buy more of US goods, And as foreigners buy more of US goods, that just tells us that our US net exports rise. US net exports are going to increase. So here, this is the simplest one out of these two right here. Foreign income increases, foreigners are going to be able to buy more of US goods, so therefore our US net exports increase. That shifts our aggregate demand curve over to the right. The more complex one is going to be these exchange rate changes. We need to introduce a few concepts with this one. So exchange rate changes. With exchange rate changes, we need to be comparing two different countries' currencies against one another. So suppose that there's going to be an appreciation of a foreign currency. So suppose there is an appreciation of a particular currency. So anytime there's an appreciation of a particular currency, it tells us that this currency is actually getting stronger. It's worth more money. So here we can consider this a synonym. It strengthens, or is worth more. So here there is a strengthening, or this currency is worth more. So anytime there's an appreciation, this is exactly what it means. So suppose that this one currency could buy, say, maybe $1 US. Now this foreign currency can buy $2 US. So here we consider this to be an appreciation of that currency. And suppose that there's an appreciation of the foreign currency. And suppose, just to give you a clearer example, a specific example, let's go ahead and say Brazil. So here, Brazil. So Brazil has the real as their currency. So suppose that there's an appreciation of the foreign currency, in this case, the Brazilian real. So here, suppose just in this example, one Brazilian real could buy $1 US. Now, one Brazilian real can buy maybe $5 US. So here, the foreign currency has actually gotten stronger. What does this mean immediately for the US dollar? It means that it's gotten weaker compared to the Brazilian real or to the foreign currency. So if you compare two currencies against one another, currency A against currency B, if currency A appreciates against currency B, that means currency B has to depreciate or become weaker compared to currency A. So in this case, the US dollar, we can say the US dollar is going to depreciate. So depreciate is just going to be the opposite of an appreciation, which tells us that, hey, the US dollar weakens. So weakens or is worth less. So in this instance, suppose that we had the example from before, $1 US could be able to buy one Brazilian real. Now you need $2 US in order to buy one Brazilian real. So in order to exchange money with all of that. So here, this is exactly appreciation, depreciation in the simplest sense. So when there is an appreciation of the foreign currency, that's actually going to be good for the United States' exports, because that just tells us that our goods have become cheaper in comparison to one another. So take a look at this. When the foreign currency appreciates, it's worth more money. So here, Brazilians essentially become a little bit richer or wealthier in this sense. And where are they going to go ahead and spend their money? They're going to go ahead and spend their money on foreign goods, in this instance on US goods. So more foreigners buy US goods. Buy US goods. So this is actually kind of sort of counterintuitive. Whenever there's a depreciation of the US dollar, that's actually going to be good for our US net exports. So here, our net exports are going to increase as a result of this transaction, or as a result of this shock. So US net exports are going to increase. And anytime US net exports increase, as we noted before, it's going to shift our aggregate demand curve over to the right. So anytime there's an appreciation of the foreign currency, their currency gets stronger against the US dollar, they're going to go ahead and buy more of US goods, which causes our US net exports to increase. Anytime the US dollar depreciates or gets weaker or is worth less, then this effect happens as well. So here you just want to be a little bit careful because it's sort of counterintuitive. Anytime the US dollar depreciates, our US net exports go up, but anytime the US dollar appreciates, our US net exports are going to go down. So these are all the shocks that we've taken a look at for consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, and all the smaller subcategories that go along with it. We have consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. And finally here, there is a very big summary table that is a very, very good thing for you guys to go ahead and take a look at, which will basically illustrate how all these are going to be affecting our aggregate demand curve. We've essentially hit everything here on the aggregate demand increases, so I would go ahead and highly encourage you to go ahead and take a look to make sure that we have drawn these out correctly. As well, I would highly encourage you to go ahead and take a look at the opposite case, where aggregate demand decreases, and shift all of our curves to the opposite direction, just to make sure that you get that intuition, that proper economic intuition with all of these sort of shifts right here. Once again, we will be explicitly clear about exactly how all these shifts are going to be affecting each specific category, just to make sure that you hit the right determinant. And we'll do the same thing on the supply side as well. So this will do it for all the determinants of aggregate demand. Our next job is to go ahead and build up the supply side of the market, where we take a look at two different supply curves. A supply curve in the short run, and also a supply curve in the long run. So what are the similarities and differences of each of them?